Amen. You guys can grab a seat. Well, between Bob's prayer and the baptisms and testimonies, I feel pretty JV coming up here, but I know God speaks through his word being preached. So, hey, thanks, guys, for being here this morning. My name's Austin, if we haven't met, one of the pastors. Can we give it up for everyone in the overflow room, by the way? There's like a bunch of, the 1002 room. Love you guys. They're over there. They didn't have a seat, but they're in there. They're all hanging out. It's a great party in there. And so, anyways, hey, a couple years ago, I got the privilege of going to Cambodia to teach at a conference on multiplication and church planting. And so we were there. It was such an incredible time. But less than 2% of Cambodia's population knows Jesus, which makes it an unreached people group. And an unreached people group basically means that it's not a sustainable amount of Christians to be able to reach the rest of the country, so it's unreached. And so when we got to gather in a room like this with a few hundred Christian leaders in Cambodia, they actually represented most of the leadership for the entire nation. Like it was a humbling moment. And we get to hear, just incredible, unbelievable stories of this one guy in a village getting saved, and then he led like a few dozen other people to Christ in his village, and then every Sunday they kind of have church together, and then they get on their bikes. Imagine us getting on our bikes, and then they ride their bikes to another village and share the gospel and are leading them to Christ, and they establish a church, and then leaders raise up, and then they take bikes, and they go. It's just like it felt like the early church, and I'm like, this is so crazy. And so at the end of the conference, we wanted to serve them. And so it was great to be able to teach and share what God's done through City Light and whatever, but it'd be really fun to serve you guys. And so Jack Arendt, who's one of the elders at City Light in Omaha, he had the idea of let's wash their feet. I'm like, that sounds great, And so, but we wanted like a little bit of a twist to it. See, Cambodian culture is extremely respectful to elders, to older people. And so the older you are, the more respect and honor you get. And so, but we kind of wanted to change it up. And so we would walk around with bowls of water and towels, and we kind of split the room into like small groups of about 8 people. And so we'd walk around and we'd say we're over here, and I got a couple gray-haired people in here, but we go here, and everybody, they would always like move out of the way so that it was a direct line to the oldest person in the group of 8 people. Like they were like, oh, and they'd go, and then we'd look, and they're like, okay, Bob. Like they'd be like, Bob, and then it was like, and then we just pick the sketchiest looking person. We'd go to like the dirtiest, youngest Cambodian dude in the circle and wash his feet, and they were all like, they're that's not okay. Like that's not what we do. And it was like just going against that. And so it was just this crazy, beautiful thing, and we'd wash their feet, and we'd pray over them and preach the gospel over them and just encourage them. It was an awesome, unforgettable time. But when Jesus comes on the scene, it seems like most of the people kind of move out of the way so that Jesus can most directly get to the elite religious of the day, right? The moral heroes, the pastors of the day. It's like, oops, sorry, like you go ahead, and that's the assumption, is that Jesus is going to go hang out with all the people that are really, really good and have kept their lives together, all the people that are worthy of getting their feet washed or worthy of a conversation with Jesus. But what I love about Jesus is he never seems to do what we expect him to do, right? He doesn't come into the crowd and applaud the rule followers. He doesn't highlight the high and mighty. He is magnetized to the most far off and unlikely rebels. And so in Luke 19, we get to see Jesus' mission statement. It's very different than what we would naturally think. So here's just to articulate this. Here's kind of sermon in a sentence, is that Jesus didn't come to scold the law breaking, and he also didn't come to select the law abiding. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. That's why he came. That's his mission statement. That's why he came with flesh and bone here on earth, to seek and save the lost. So let's jump in, verses 1-4 in Luke 19. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he couldn't, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up in a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. So first thing I want us to see this morning in these verses is that Zacchaeus was seeking for something. Zacchaeus was seeking for something. Now, verse 1, if you look at it, it says that Jesus went through Jericho and was passing through. So Luke doesn't indicate that Jesus had a plan to stay there for a while or anything. He was just passing through. this city to get to his final destination, which is Jerusalem, where he would die on a cross for sinners all over the world. And then verse 2, we get a man named Zacchaeus introduced to us. And Luke gives us two descriptors of who Zacchaeus is in verse 2. He's a chief tax collector, and he is rich. Okay, so we've been talking about, if you've been with us through our study through Luke, it's been about a year or so, we've talked a decent amount about tax collectors, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, tax collectors were Jews that worked for the Roman Empire, Roman government, to enforce oppressive taxes on their fellow Jews. Okay, they were considered insidious traitors, and they were extremely hated. Nobody liked tax collectors, but Zacchaeus isn't just your run-of-the-mill tax collector. No, it says he was the chief tax collector. This dude's the head honcho. He was all the tax collecting scoundrels' boss, right? He is the kingpin. And so the text doesn't explain how he got this gig, but most commentators believe the way he got this job is by being a ruthless tax collector himself. And they went, whoa, this guy gets it done. This guy collects massive taxes on time. Hey, let's make you the head of all of them and then teach them how to do what you've done. So Zacchaeus was incredibly good at his job. So however bad the tax collectors were, multiply that by 8, and then that's Zacchaeus. Now, Luke also mentions that he's rich. Luke mentions rich people or riches 3 primary times in the book of Luke. Luke 12, if you take notes, the parable of the rich fool who stored up for himself treasures here on earth, but was broke eternally. Luke 16, we just covered that, preached that a couple weeks ago with Lazarus and the rich man. And the rich man used money to help himself and ended up in hell. And then last week, Brett preached on Luke 18 with the rich young ruler. And what was his thing? He was unwilling to give up what? His riches, and he walks away sad and unsaved. And in Luke 18, verse 25, Jesus says, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. So let's put this stuff together. Tax collector, rich. When we hear that Zacchaeus, the ruthless chief tax collector, is rich, what it's saying is that it's another hopeless scenario, impossibly hardened towards salvation. That's kind of the equation we're getting so far. But look at verses 3 and 4. And when he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he couldn't because he was in small stature. So there's 3. It says Zacchaeus, one of the least likely people that we've run into in the whole book of Luke. It says that he was seeking to see who Jesus was. This tax collector, rich man, is seeking to see who Jesus was. Now, notice it doesn't say that he was seeking to see Jesus, but he was seeking to see who Jesus was. Now, a couple months ago, I was in Shields, and I ran into Scott Frost. And I had 2 options. Number 1, I could take a picture of Scott and, from a distance and say, hey, everybody, I saw Scott Frost. Or I could strike up a conversation with him, and I could actually see who he was, who he is as a person. And so we ended up having a great conversation. But I want to point this out. It doesn't say in verse 3 that Zacchaeus, it doesn't indicate that he just wanted to get a picture from a distance of Jesus. That would be to see Jesus. He wants to see who Jesus was. Who this rabbi from Nazareth that's flipping the world upside down. I want to know who you actually are. I don't just want a picture of you and see you from a distance. I want to know who you really are. And perhaps the most well-known thing about Zacchaeus is that he was short, wee little man, whatever, which I can relate, and as Jesus, I kind of like Zacchaeus, I got a heart for him. But as Jesus is passing through Jericho, so picture this, passing through Jericho, there's a humongous crowd. I think we can picture that pretty easy. And they're surrounding Jesus. If we all stood up and got to the middle, where they're surrounding him. And so Zacchaeus is vertically challenged, okay? He can't see above everybody, so he goes, hey, problem solved. I see a tree. And he climbed up in the rafters, and he could see in to get a better glimpse of who Jesus really is. I don't know about you, though, but here's the question that comes to mind when I read these verses. Why would Zacchaeus want to see who Jesus was? Think about this. Why would he actually want to see who Jesus was? The text doesn't explicitly say this, but I want to draw out 2 options or points as we process this. Number 1 is think about how opposite this is from today's perspective of Jesus. What do immoral, blown it big time people usually think about Jesus or church or Christianity? It's the classic line, right? If I stepped into church, man, I'd catch on fire. Our culture's natural perception of Jesus is that he created a country club of moral victors with membership requirements of church service and religious achievements and Bible memory verses. Our culture's natural perception of Jesus is that he doesn't want anything to do with people who've fallen deeply into the belly of sin. So if you want to be around Jesus, great, but you better go and get your act together first. Go home, sober up, and come back later. Go clean yourself up, and once you are clean, then you can come into his holy presence and inner circle. And this perception of Jesus, I'm telling you, has been a poison to Jesus' kingdom for so long, and it is so prevalent today. It's prevented millions of people from coming to Jesus, and it's pushed them further into their rebellion and further into their hopelessness. But something is different about Zacchaeus, or something's different about people's perception of Jesus 2,000 years ago than it is today. See, unlike our modern day culture, Zacchaeus' badness didn't keep him from Jesus. I think it drew him to Jesus. You see the difference there? Maybe it's because back in Luke 5, Jesus calls Matthew, who was a tax collector, to be one of his disciples. And maybe Zacchaeus and Matthew or Levi knew each other and go, oh man, maybe. Or maybe it's because he had heard the rumors that Jesus hangs out with drunkards and tax collectors and notorious sinners and prostitutes. Maybe Zacchaeus thought he might actually fit in with this Jesus and the people he hangs out with. Regardless of the reason, I want to point out that the Jesus 2,000 years ago didn't repulse sinners, didn't repulse the worst of the worst. And so if you're currently feeling like Zacchaeus, if you're in the room and you feel like the far-off rebel who's crashed and burned your life, I want you to know that Jesus loved hanging out with people like you. If you're currently feeling like Zacchaeus, the immoral scoundrel who spent your life hurting people, I want to apologize for the way the church has not represented Jesus accurately. If the Jesus 2,000 years ago drew the inquiry of the most ruthless leader, he must still be doing that today. So, second thing I want to point out, though, is that Zacchaeus is still searching for something. He's still searching for something. Listen, he had power. He had a bougie job. He could pull strings. He had stability. He had respect. He had control. He had people to do stuff that he didn't want to do. He had a nice home. He had all of that. And if he had all of that, then why is Zacchaeus still seeking something? Right? Like, why is he still searching? The answer is because none of that will satisfy. I'm betting that Zacchaeus had accumulated everything the world has to offer, everything the world promises will satisfy, everything the world tells us to get, and he goes, man, I'm still empty. I'm still unsatisfied. And guess what we normally do when we realize what we have isn't satisfying? We go get more. We double down. We chase it harder. We run. We set new goals, and we run even faster and even harder into it. And ultimately, I'm telling you, it's chasing the wind. Searching for satisfaction in this world is a journey that we will spend our entire lives looking for and never end up finding. It's elusive, unless we look to Jesus, of course. I have a friend named Tad. You might know his story. He's in his 50s, and he's been a CEO of a company. He's a very successful businessman. He has an incredible, supportive wife. He has 2 beautiful, healthy children who are married to amazing people. He's got a granddaughter. He gets to go on tropical vacations every year. I'm trying to get on one of those. But Tad is where a lot of us want to be someday. Tad is exactly where a lot of us want to be someday. And a couple years ago, Tad and I got to have dinner. And it's great. I love this guy, by the way. He's so generous and so genuine. And I'm asking why. Why are we sitting for dinner? He says, I want to know more about Jesus. And I said, okay, why do you want to know more about Jesus? And he said something like, I wake up every morning and my heart is heavy. I have everything I've wanted and I'm still empty. And maybe Jesus could do something about that. And I'm telling you, that gut-level, raw honesty was one of the most refreshing things I had ever heard. And so over the course of a year, lots of gospel conversations with lots of different people, God softened Tad's heart, and Tad surrendered his life to Jesus. It was amazing. I mean, just a crazy celebration. He shared his story and got baptized this summer. God broke into his heart and did an amazing thing. And he's transforming this man right now. As we speak, he's still doing it. He's preaching the gospel everywhere he goes. He can't get the gospel off of his lips. He's leveraging his position and influence for the gospel and God's kingdom. He's leveraging his generosity for Jesus' kingdom. It is awesome. So the person in this room or listening or whatever that's at the buffet of everything the world has to offer, are you really satisfied? Like, are you really happy? Has the new car, the vacation home, the bigger house, the better position really given you what it promised it would? And for the person in the room that's consumed with the dream of getting there someday to where Tad was, dreaming of financial success and a healthy family and a nice home and fun vacations and a great whatever, don't waste your life chasing what will never satisfy you. Jeremiah 2:13 is a verse I go to often, and this is what God says in Jeremiah 2:13. My people have committed two evils. They've forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and they've hewed out cisterns, like wells for themselves. And they're broken cisterns, he says, they can't hold water. What's God saying in this? That our natural disposition is to believe the world can give us what God can't, more than God can. And so we have rejected God, we've forsaken him, and we have dug out, worked our lives, worked our fingers down to the bone, digging out these wells and having water in them, but then they don't hold water, whatever they are, they don't have water. And so they keep leaking, which means we have to keep working and keep digging and all this stuff, and yet there's a free waterfall of grace right there offered for free, right in front of us. And so the most shocking thing about this story, it is shocking that the ruthless ringleader of the rebels is seeking to know Jesus. But the most shocking thing in this story is that Jesus is actually the one seeking the ruthless ringleader of the rebels, Zacchaeus, right? So look what happens in verses 5 and 7. Now when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried down and came and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled, he's gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Second thing I want to see is not only that Zacchaeus is seeking for something, but that Jesus is seeking sinners. So imagine if Garth Brooks comes back to Lincoln this year, and he packs out Memorial Stadium, and it's awesome. And right before he sings Friends in Low Places, he goes, Brian Dighton, Come down, sing this with me. And it's not like Brian's right here. He's in the nosebleeds, because he's cheap, but he's like, hey, Brian, come up here, And it come down, and he's like, and he goes through the microphone, actually, after the show, I heard you cook a mean ribeye. Prove it, and let's have dinner afterwards. It's like, okay, that sounds great. And Brian would be like, I don't know, this is crazy. Like, this has to be what Zacchaeus feels like. Like, Jesus is walking through, the crowd's packed, he's shouldering through, and Zacchaeus is just like up and perched in a tree and looking, and Jesus goes like this, stops, Zacchaeus. Hey, Zacchaeus. Yeah, the guy in the tree, come down, man, I heard you cook a mean ribeye. It's like the craziest deal. Like, this is shocking, right? It's shocking. It's so unusual. Like, Jesus, the man who drew thousands and thousands, Jesus, the one who walked on water and healed blind eyes and made lepers clean and made lame people walk and leap for joy. I mean, that Jesus just said he's passing through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem to die on a cross, jam-packed in with a humongous crowd around him. He stops. Everyone holds their breath. And then he goes, Zacchaeus, come down with me. I want to hang out with you. He looks up to the most notorious criminal and hated person in the whole city and says, let's hang out. This is wild. This is inconceivable. And so let me point out two things in verse 5 if you look at it. First, notice that Jesus calls him by name. He didn't go, hey, you. He says, Zacchaeus. Now, this is so crucial. Verse 3 said that Zacchaeus wanted to see who Jesus was, indicating that they had never met before. So in verse 5, Jesus flexes his divinity by knowing his name and says, Zacchaeus, I want to hang out with you. Now, it could be tempting. This is important to have clear. It could be tempting to think that Zacchaeus is the lead seeker in our story. Right? Like, after all, he's the one in the tree trying to see who Jesus is. But Jesus sets the story straight and says, no. I'm calling you by name. I'm the one seeking you. Romans 3 says that no one seeks God. So no one naturally has the divine idea that Jesus is Lord and that we should turn to him. Our thinking is futile, it's broken, it's worldly, it's filled with lies. A dead person can't resurrect themselves. A blind person can't open their eyes. A lame person can't crawl their way to God. And so he is the one that pursues us. He's the one that finds us. He's the one that seeks us. And one of the ways he seeks us is by sending his Spirit in to soften our calloused hearts so that when we actually hear the gospel, we can receive it with joy and faith. So I just wanted to be clear. This interaction wasn't on accident. It was planned. Jesus had been seeking Zacchaeus' heart for a long, long time. Bob Walls told me that Zacchaeus is checking Jesus out, but Jesus is calling Zacchaeus out. There's a radical difference. See, in Revelation 13:8, it says there's this book that was written before the foundation of the world. And in this book, it's called The Life of the Lamb Who Was Slain. And in this book is every person, every name written that God knew that he would seek and save before the foundation of the world. And so Zacchaeus' name had been written in this book before the creation of earth. Before it all, Jesus said, I want that man in my family. And I'll be the lamb who was slain in order to purchase him in. 2,000 years ago, on a road in Jericho, Jesus looked into the eyes of a man he formed in his mother's womb and said, come, I want to hang out with you. I want to be with you. Is that not amazing? And this is what he does today. He's calling some of you by name this morning. But Jesus doesn't just mention his name. He says, I must stay at your house today. He goes, Zacchaeus, come down, for I must stay at your house today. Now, I want to be clear. This isn't Jesus throwing out a cool idea, right? It was Jesus inviting himself over. He's like, hey, I must come. There's no question mark like, hey, could I maybe? Are you free this afternoon? No, I'm coming over is what Jesus is saying. Now, people quote Revelation 3, where Jesus talks about how he stands at the door and knocks, and people are like, hey, that's people's urging to say, hey, would you open your heart to Jesus? He wants to come into your heart. And there's a couple things with that. Number one, Jesus wasn't speaking those verses to individuals. He was speaking it to a church who had forsaken the gospel. And he's saying, would you open the church doors back to the gospel that your first love? And number two, Jesus doesn't stand at the door and knock. He opens the door and invites himself in. And if he has to, he breaks it down, right? And I'm telling you, that's the best news you could ever hear. Think about it. If my salvation rests on me coming to the conclusion that I should let Jesus in, that means he may never actually come in. But if my salvation rests on the unrelenting initiative of Jesus coming after me, regardless of my kicking and screaming, that means he seeks and saves who he wants. And to be clear, this isn't to say that Jesus rudely forces his way into our lives, but it is to say that he won't stop chasing us, that he won't give up until he's wooed our souls to worship. He won't give up until we realize the scandal of his grace offered personally to each one of us individually. But look at Zacchaeus' response to the crowd, or response to Jesus, and the crowd's response to what they do. It's so significant. So it says that Zacchaeus, in verse 6, received him joyfully. He came down, and when they had heard it, they grumbled, saying, he's gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Zacchaeus receives him joyfully, invites Jesus right into his home, cooks his best meal. It's great, but the crowd's infuriated. They grumble. Of all the righteous people in our city, of all the people who've been working hard and doing their stuff, if Jesus has got one night to spend in Jericho, this is not the guy to spend time with. This is not the guy to spend the night. Do you know how many other people deserve a night with Jesus and how they'd be impacted by it? How dare you allocate your time to Zacchaeus? Everyone talks about Fixer Upper, right? Chip and Joe. I love it. I'm all about it. I've watched about every episode you can, you know. We got Shiplap up in our house. But one of my other favorite shows is Hometown with Aaron and Ben. Any fans of those? Yeah, it's awesome. But on one season, they go to this like town. I think it's in Alabama or something like that. It's a small town. And I think a tornado had hit, and they said, hey, we're going to fix up 8 houses. We're going to go through. And so each episode in the season of Hometown, Ben and Aaron go through, and they like you choose different houses, and each episode is kind of highlighting the story of the person that they're fixing up. And it's like there's a school teacher, and there's a police officer, and then there's like the small town mayor that had been a barber for 50 years. Like, it's awesome. And every episode, you just love the people that they chose to renovate their house, you know? And so imagine on the season finale, the 8th episode of the season, they reveal who they chose, and it's the guy who just got out of prison for murder. And he got off on a technicality way earlier. He only served like a year. He's supposed to be in prison for life. And so he gets out, and he spent his first couple weeks out of prison in this little small town just intimidating people, getting what he wants, like whatever, stealing. And Bennett and Aaron are like, this is who we're doing it. And we'd be like, oh, what about the family who adopted 5 kids? Like, they need it, you know? There'd be an outrage. Like, people would literally just turn off the TV. Like, we would be so mad if that's who they chose to give their talents to. But this is what's happening. This is what's happening with Jesus and Zacchaeus. Instead of the family who adopted 5 kids or this religious leaders, Jesus picks the worst, most hated criminal in town. See, although the Jews saw Zacchaeus as a worthless criminal, Jesus saw him as a valuable lost sinner. Throughout the book of Luke, we've seen that Jesus is drawn to sinners. He's drawn to the misfits and the outlaws. And we've seen that sinners and outlaws and misfits are drawn to Jesus, right? So check this out. Luke mentions through this gospel account, he mentions tax collectors 6 different times. And every single one of them is positive. It's kind of shocking if you look through. So in Luke 3, verse 12, it says tax collectors came to be baptized. In Luke 5, verse 27, it says that Matthew's a tax collector, Levi, and Jesus calls him to be an apostle. Luke 7, 29, it says the tax collectors accept God's way is right, but the Pharisees reject it. In Luke 15, it says tax collectors and sinners were drawing near to Jesus to hear him. In Luke 18, the tax collector gets justified and the Pharisee doesn't. In Luke 19:6, Zacchaeus, this chief tax collector, receives him joyfully. Why? Listen, because tax collectors are the kind of people Jesus came to seek. The people who undeniably know that they're sinners, that they're hopeless. That doesn't mean, though, that he didn't come for the rule followers and the morally upright. What it means, what he's drawing out, is that rebels often receive Jesus and the rule followers often reject him. See, at the core of the gospel is a conviction that you actually need to be saved, that you can't save yourself. And what a greater example of someone who knows they can't save themselves than a chief tax collector. These are the type of people Jesus saves. See, if you're outwardly clean, which I think there might be scattered through lots of us, if you're outwardly clean, you have to look inside at your motive and realize that you are just as guilty as anyone. Do you guys remember the treacherous, unbelievable, inconceivable sin that Adam and Eve committed in the garden to get kicked out of the garden? Remember what it was? Was it murder? Was it adultery? Was it racism? Was it stealing? No, it was eating a fruit that God said not to. That seemingly small disobedience separated them from the presence of God. And it's the same for us. See, we're not comparing who's sinned less. We're convinced that we've all sinned, regardless of who's more or whatever, and that we desperately need Jesus to save us because we can't save ourselves. So let me be clear. If you're a Christian, Jesus didn't choose you because you were upstanding. I just need you to hear that. Like, Jesus didn't decide to come and eat with you because you made the best dinner. He didn't save you because you almost saved yourself and did 90% of the work. No, he chose you before the foundation of the world, before you ever did anything, and knowing everything terrible you would do by grace and grace alone. And I'm just saying, that should produce humility, right? Like the craziest gratitude and humility of anyone in the whole world. That should produce worship and awe like nothing else. Like if you clap and cheer at a sporting event, awesome, I'm right there with you. But that should dictate the way you worship in this place even infinitely more. And so if you're also in here and you're sitting in your guilt and your shame from your most recent mistakes, contemplating how to get your life together so maybe Jesus will look your way, look at these verses and feel the gaze of Jesus at you right now. Turn from your sin and self-help and come to Jesus as your Savior, not just once, but every single day. Jesus seeks the scoundrel of the city, the one everyone else gave up on, the one drenched with a life of sin. And Jesus, by the way, isn't just interested in offering to save people for eternity. He's offering to transform people right here and now. So as we finish the sermon of the text, look at verses 8 through 10. And Zacchaeus stood and said to him, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I'll restore it fourfold. And Jesus said, today salvation has come to this house, since he is also a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Last quick thing to say before we finish is those whom Jesus seeks don't stay the same. Those whom Jesus seeks don't stay the same. Now, we don't know how much time had passed before Zacchaeus had made his generous offer. Maybe they were midway in on the spinach artichoke dip. Maybe they were eating the creme brulee. I don't know, for dessert. I don't know. But regardless, the time he had with Jesus changed everything. And I wish I knew. I wish we got a glimpse into what that time was like, what they talked about, what happened in that. But all we know is this, is that if you spend time with Jesus, you don't remain the same. That's what Zacchaeus is showing us in this. To be clear, it never mentions that Jesus asked Zacchaeus to do this or that it was a clear requirement in order for salvation to come. It's fair to assume that this was purely voluntary. He says, he goes, I'll give half of what I have to the poor. Now it says that he was rich. So maybe let's say modern day equivalent to Lincoln, say he's got $1 million in net worth. And he goes, I'm going to give half of it away to the poor. If $500,000 was infused to the poor or the homeless in our community, there might not be any people that are homeless. Just in one swift thing, like they could maybe get a cheaper car or an apartment, so they drive the car to drive to their work, a nice outfit for their interview, healthy food. I mean, it could flip the whole economics of the city just in one generous gift of half of someone's rich income. And then he goes, actually, I'm going to go above and beyond. If I've defrauded anyone, I'm going to repay that fourfold. I'm going to give 4 times as much as I took if I defrauded. But okay, that sounds cool. Think about how Zacchaeus got his net worth. By defrauding people. So, for him to pay back 4 times what he defrauded most likely communicates that Zacchaeus gave away everything he had. I mean, he finishes this meal and might not have a cent to his name. Like, how would you feel after giving away everything that you'd worked your life to earn? And then Jesus affirms him. He shares his mission statement. He goes, today's salvation has come. You're also a son of Abraham. And he goes, the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. This is what I came here for. But I want to be clear. Zacchaeus wasn't saved because he gave everything away. He gave everything away because he was saved. And this is what Jesus does. This is what spending time with Jesus does. I think it was Tim Keller who said that when you get in a relationship with Jesus, he cuts the umbilical cord of money. Like, there's this sense of like, that's not my life anymore. That's not my identity. That's not my hope. And he's cut the umbilical cord and said, I want to be generous with this. And so listen, those who seek Jesus don't stay the same. It's impossible. This does not mean that your life is fixed and free of mistakes. Far from that. But what it does mean is there is tangible evidence of being with Jesus. There is a present fight with sin. There is a growing love for what Jesus loves. There's a yearning to be like Jesus. And this is his mission statement. This is what he sent out to be. And this is what should embody our church and our lives. That the Son of Man who sought and saved us, that we should go and also seek the world so that Jesus might save them. Just recently, a couple months ago, we had laid out that we had kind of a new mission statement and vision statement. And one of the things I try to be really clear is the mission statement and the vision statement for our church are not new. They're just a clarity and a language of what we've always been doing and what we've always wanted to do. And so our mission statement is to magnify Jesus by multiplying disciples in church. That's what we've always done. And what I want to tell you is Jesus' mission statement has never changed. All the way back in Genesis 3, Adam and Eve sin. And what do? What do we do when we sin? They hide. And God told them, if you eat from this tree, you will die. So in that moment, when they take that bite, boom, their heart could have stopped dead. No humanity, no nothing, right? No TikTok, no crazy viral cat videos, whatever. That might have been, helpful. But anyways, but he doesn't. He shows them grace and mercy in that moment by not killing them. And what does God do? He seeks them. He goes to the garden and seeks them out and calls them. And I know he enforces punishment and justice and says, hey, for your sin, you're kicked out of the garden. But in Genesis 3, he promises, I'm going to send a son. I'm going to send a son, and that son's going to crush the head of the serpent. And that was Jesus. And just think like all the way in Genesis 3, God has been seeking and saving the lost. And all the way in Luke 19, he's still seeking and saving the lost. And all the way in 2022, guess what he's still doing? Seeking and saving the lost. And all throughout until eternity consummates in our beautiful feast, that will be what Jesus has done, is seeking and saving the lost. Amen? We're products of that. Let's pray.